1967, Buffalo Springfield, for what it's worth. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's coming down. It doesn't change. We've got to keep our eyes wide open and look at different options for things. And one of the things that we have option to do here on the New Way is we have a way of looking at the secret teachings of the ages and evaluating things that they didn't tell us in school. So this is the third episode of our oration, in which Mel is going to take us into the thoughts of Manley Hall. So Mel, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Yes, I will be taking you into the work of Manley P. Hall as soon as I restart my laptop, which I've just restarted it.
Yeah, I heard the music.
Unfortunately, my laptop's rather old, and I needed to restart it. I realised when the music started. So today we'll be going into the rites of Mithras. We have covered previously a history and overview of philosophy, and we have then branched into the next part of the work, which is about the history of secret societies, and I believe it's mystery traditions. So the first part of that was reading about the organisation, a brief overview of the organisation of the Druidic culture. And the next section, which is where we left off last time, was to talk about the rites of Mithras. And for the listeners' benefit, this work is available for free on www.sacredtexts.com. It is Manley P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All the Ages. It was written in the 1920s and is copyright free. So anyone can go on to the link and to find the work and follow on or read for themselves. So I am just going to open it up now and find our spot.
Does the program have a bookmark that locates you to the spot, or do you have to scroll through different pages to get there?
I have to scroll through different pages to get there. I haven't found, I've bookmarked it, but I haven't, it just takes me to the beginning of the work each time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have learned that in my world, I'm real easy to misplace things. And so bookmarks and tags often have scribbles on them that tell me how to do stuff. But setup is everything. Once you're set up to do things, the flow happens readily. And booting the laptop, I had to boot my tablet last minute also, so I understand exactly how this all works. But so do the listeners. And you got to give credit to the listeners for really understanding the world is not at all what we were told the world is. And by taking our individual perspectives on the world and then listening to some perspectives like Manley Hall from the 1920s, I think we can get a lot more perspective on what's going on, and we'll find that some of these secret teachings should not be kept secret and should be taught in first and second grade, and that a lot of our problem is education, indoctrination, and the ownership of information, which isn't being passed freely as it has been in every other time in history.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree. Okay, so I've now found our place. So I will go straight into it. So this is the section, as stated, called the Rites of Mithras. When the Persian mysteries immigrated into southern Europe, they were quickly assimilated by the Latin mind. The cult grew rapidly, especially among the Roman soldiery. And during the Roman wars of conquest, the teachings were carried by the legionaries to nearly all parts of Europe. So powerful did the cult of Mithras become that at least one Roman emperor was initiated into the order, which met in caverns under the city of Rome. Concerning the spread of this mystery school through different parts of Europe, C. W. King, in his Gnostics and Their Remains, says, Mithraic bas-reliefs cut on the faces of rocks or on stone tablets still abound in the countries formerly the western provinces of the world Roman Empire. Many exist in Germany, still more in France, and in this island, in brackets Britain, they have often been discovered on the line of the Pits Wall and the noted one at Bath. Alexander Wilder, in his Philosophy and Ethics of the Zoroastrians, states that Mithras is the Zend title, that is Zend, Z-E-N-D, for the sun, and he is supposed to dwell within that shining orb. Mithras has a male and a female aspect, though not himself androgynous. As Mithras, he is the Ford of the sun, powerful and radiant, and most magnificent of the Yazatas. I'll spell that, Y-A-Z-A-T-A-Z. In brackets it says Izads, I-Z-A-D-S, or Geni, G-E-N-I-I, of the sun, close bracket. As Mithra, without the S, this deity represents the feminine principle. The mundane universe is recognized as her symbol. She represents nature as receptive and terrestrial, and as fruitful only when bathed in the glory of the solar orb. The Mithraic cult is a simplification of the more elaborate teachings of Zarathustra, in brackets Zoroaster, the Persian fire magician. According to the Persians, there coexisted in eternity two principles. The first of these, Ahura Mazda, or Ormuzd, was the spirit of good. From Ormuzd, that's spelt O-R-M-U-Z-D, came forth a number of hierarchies of good and beautiful spirits, in brackets angels and archangels. The second of these eternally existing principles was called Ahriman, that's A-H-R-I-M-A-N. He was also a pure and beautiful spirit, but he later rebelled against Ormuzd, being jealous of his power. This did not occur, however, until after Ormuzd had created light, for previously Ahriman had not been conscious of the existence of Ormuzd. Because of his jealousy and rebellion, Ahriman became the spirit of evil. From himself, he individualized a host of destructive creatures to injure Ormuzd. When Ormuzd created the earth, Ahriman entered into its grosser elements. Whenever Ormuzd did a good deed, Ahriman placed the principle of evil within it. At last, when Ormuzd created the human race, Ahriman became incarnate in the lower nature of man, so that in each personality the spirit of good and the spirit of evil struggle for control. For 3,000 years, Ormuzd ruled the celestial worlds with light and goodness. Then he created man. For another 3,000 years, he ruled man with wisdom and integrity. Then the power of Ahriman began, and the struggle for the soul of man continues through the next period of 3,000 years. During the fourth period of 3,000 years, the power of Ahriman will be destroyed. Good will return to the world again, evil and death will be vanquished, and at last the spirit of evil will bow humbly before the throne of Ormuzd. While Ormuzd and Ahriman are struggling for control of the human soul and for supremacy in nature, Mithras, god of intelligence, stands as mediator between the two. Many authors have noted the similarity between Mercury and Mithras, as the chemical mercury acts as a solvent, according to alchemists. So Mithras seeks to harmonize the two celestial opposites. There are many points of resemblance between Christianity and the cult of Mithras. One of the reasons for this, probably, is that the Persian mystics invaded Italy during the 1st century after Christ, and the early history of both cults was closely interwoven. The Encyclopaedia Britannica makes the following statement concerning the Mithraic and Christian mysteries. The fraternal and democratic spirit of the first communities and their humble origin, the identification of the object of adoration with light and the sun, the legends of the shepherds with their gifts and adoration, the flood and the ark, the representation in art of the fiery chariot, the drawing of water from the rock, the use of bell and candle, holy water and the communion, the sanctification of Sunday and of the 25th of December, the insistence on moral conduct, the emphasis placed on abstinence and self-control, the doctrine of heaven and hell, of primitive revelation, of the mediation of the logos emanating from the divine, the atoning sacrifice, the constant warfare between good and evil, and the final triumph of the former, the immortality of the soul, the last judgment, the resurrection of the flesh, and the fiery destruction of the universe. These are some of the resemblances which, whether real or only apparent, enabled Mithraism to prolong its resistance to Christianity. The rites of Mithras were performed in caves. Porphyry, in his Cave of the Nymphs, states that Zarathustra, in brackets Zoroaster, was the first to consecrate a cave to the worship of God, because a cavern was symbolic of the earth, or the lower world of darkness. John P. Lundy, in his Monumental Christianity, describes the cave of Mithras as follows. But this cave was adorned with the signs of the zodiac, Cancer and Capricorn. The summer and winter solstices were chiefly conspicuous, as the gates of souls descending into this life or passing out of it in their ascent to the gods. Cancer being the gate of descent and Capricorn of ascent. These are the two avenues of the immortals, passing up and down from earth to heaven and from heaven to earth. End quote. The so-called chair of St. Peter in Rome was believed to have been used in one of the pagan mysteries, possibly that of Mithras, in whose subterranean grottos the votaries of the Christian mysteries met in the early days of their faith. In Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins writes that in 1662, while cleaning this sacred chair of Bar Jonas, the 12 labours of Hercules were discovered upon it, and that later the French discovered upon the same chair the Mohammedan Confession of Faith, written in Arabic. Initiation into the rites of Mithras, like initiation into many other ancient schools of philosophy, apparently consisted of 3 important degrees. Preparation for these degrees consisted of self-purification, the building up of the intellectual powers, and the control of the animal nature. In the first degree, the candidate was given a crown upon the point of the sword and instructed in the mysteries of Mithras's hidden power. Probably he was taught that the golden crown represented his own spiritual nature, which must be objectified and unfolded before he could truly glorify Mithras. For Mithras was his own soul, standing as mediator between Ormuzd, his spirit, and Ahriman, his animal nature. In the second degree, he was given the armour of intelligence and purity, and sent into the darkness of subterranean pits to fight the beasts of lust, passion, and degeneracy. In the third degree, he was given a cape, upon which were drawn or woven the signs of the zodiac and other astronomical symbols. After his initiations were over, he was hailed as one who had risen from the dead, was instructed in the secret teachings of the Persian mystics, and became a full-fledged member of the order. Candidates who successfully passed the Mithraic initiations were called lions, and were marked upon their foreheads with the Egyptian cross. Mithras himself is often pictured with the head of a lion and 2 pairs of wings. Throughout the entire ritual were repeated references to the birth of Mithras as the sun god, his sacrifice for man, his death that men might have eternal life, and lastly, his resurrection and the saving of all humanity by his intercession before the throne of Ormuzd. In brackets, it states, see Hector. While the cult of Mithras did not reach the philosophic heights attained by Zarathustra, its effect on the civilization of the Western world was far-reaching, for at one time nearly all Europe was converted to its doctrines. Rome, in her intercourse with other nations, inoculated them with her religious principles, and many later institutions have exhibited Mithraic culture. The reference to the lion and the grip of the lion's paw in the Master Mason's degree have a strong Mithraic tinge, and may easily have originated from this cult. A ladder of 7 rungs appears in the Mithraic initiation. Faber is of the opinion that this ladder was originally a pyramid of 7 steps. It is possible that the Masonic ladder with 7 rungs had its origin in this Mithraic symbol. Women were never permitted to enter the Mithraic order, but children of the male sex were initiates long before they reached maturity. The refusal to permit women to join the Masonic order may be based on the esoteric reason given in the secret instructions of the Mithraics. This cult is another excellent example of those secret societies whose legends are largely symbolic representations of the sun and his journey through the houses of the heavens. Mithras, rising from a stone, is merely the sun rising over the horizon, or, as the ancients supposed, out of the horizon at the vernal equinox. John O'Neill disputes the theory that Mithras was intended as a solar deity. In The Night of the Gods, he writes, the Avestan Mithra, the Yazata of light, has 10,000 eyes, high, with full knowledge. In brackets, there's a word which I'm not even going to attempt to say. I'll spell it for the audience. PerethuvaaedaYana. Strong, sleepless, and ever awake. In brackets, another almost unpronounceable word. Jaghaurvauнгhem. The supreme god Ahura Mazda also has 1 eye, or else it is said that with his eyes, the sun, moon, and stars, he sees everything. The theory that Mithra was originally a title of the supreme heavens god, putting the sun out of court, is the only one that answers all requirements. It will be evident that here we have origins in abundance for the Freemason's eye, and its numquam, that's Nunquam, dormio, Dormio. The reader must not confuse the Persian Mithra with the Vedic Mitra. According to Alexander Wilder, the Mithraic rites superseded the mysteries of Bacchus and became the foundation of the Gnostic system, which for many centuries prevailed in Asia, Egypt, and even the remote West. Okay, and now we're going on to part 2. Would anyone like to say anything before I start part 2? Okay.
Wait up.
Continue on.
Hang on. I was just away from the thing. One of the things that I was listening to as you were talking were the relevance of degrees and the first 3 degrees. And I get the impression that what is meant by the term degree is not at all what is awarded by the university system in degrees, but that there's things that I think it's important in to understand what these degrees are and what they mean. And I don't mean to give you the 3rd degree, but what is a degree, and how is he using the term so that we can relate what he's talking about to a level of hierarchy?
Yeah, I think you can equate it to the university system. If you consider a degree and then a master's and then a PhD. So that's 3 stages of academic education. So that the degree, you're learning a basic level, some would argue. Masters, you go on and you begin to specialise. And then the PhD, you specialise even further. You become an expert. So I think that if you can equate it to that. So these mystery schools use the 3 degrees in the same sort of way. You had the first degree where they are simply learning the ropes, I suppose, going through the first part of the process. Then you have the 2nd degree, which is a little bit more advanced. And then the 3rd degree, when you are considered an expert, a teacher, a master of that profession.
I see. So my degree in inorganic chemistry is a PhD. It qualifies me as an expert, and X means former, and everybody knows what a spurt is. But the idea that people are experts in one field and just generalists in other field needs to be carried through. And that there's a lot of people who have advanced degrees that are very, very specialized. And when they get outside their degree area, they don't really know what they're talking about. And so a lot of times, at least in the society as we're dealing with, a degree can give a false impression of knowledge. But once you realize how much time it takes to go into those degrees, to get a general feel for a subject's probably 1,000 hours or so. To get a mastery of the subject, 5,000 hours. And by the time you're really an expert in the subject, you've spent nearly 10,000 applied hours in your field learning by communicating. And the group theory that I'm working on is sort of a way of measuring the leverage so that all the hours you put into your field are enhanced by other people putting that time into their field. So as we start learning what's going on, keeping track of the time we spend in this process is going to be very valuable. And we're coming up now to 5 hours invested in Manley Hall, just listening to how he's setting the playing field for current thought. So I thought that was worth breaking in while we had the opportunity.
Yes, me too. Thank you. Give me the chance to have a drink here.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, should I continue on?
Certainly, yes.
Okay. So part 2, we're still under the ancient mysteries and secret societies. The entire history of Christian and pagan Gnosticism is shrouded in the deepest mystery and obscurity. For, while the Gnostics were undoubtedly prolific writers, little of their literature has survived. They brought down upon themselves the animosity of the early Christian church. And when this institution reached its position of world power, it destroyed all available records of the Gnostic cultus. That's cultus. The name Gnostic means wisdom or knowledge, and it is derived from the Greek gnosis. The members of the order claimed to be familiar with the secret doctrines of early Christianity. They interpreted the Christian mysteries according to pagan symbolism. Their secret information and philosophic tenets they concealed from the profane and taught to a small group only of especially initiated persons. Simon Magus, the magician of New Testament fame, is often supposed to have been the founder of Gnosticism. If this be true, the sect was formed during the century after Christ, and is probably the first of the many branches which have sprung from the main trunk of Christianity. Everything with which the enthusiasts of the early Christian church might not agree, they declared to be inspired by the devil. That Simon Magus had mysterious and supernatural powers is conceded even by his enemies, but they maintained that these powers were lent to him by the infernal spirits and furies which they asserted were his ever-present companions. Undoubtedly, the most interesting legend concerning Simon is that which tells of his philosophic contests with the Apostle Peter, while the two were promulgating their differing doctrines in Rome. According to the story that the church fathers have preserved, Simon was to prove his spiritual superiority by ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. He was actually picked up and carried many feet into the air by invisible powers. When St. Peter saw this, he cried out in a loud voice, ordering the demons, in brackets, spirits of the air, to release their hold upon the magician. The evil spirits, when so ordered by the great saint, were forced to obey. Simon fell a great distance and was killed, which decisively proved the superiority of the Christian powers. This story is undoubtedly manufactured out of whole cloth, as it is only one out of many accounts concerning his death, few of which agree, as more and more evidence is being amassed to the effect that St. Peter was never in Rome. Its last possible vestige of authenticity is rapidly being dissipated. That Simon was a philosopher, there is no doubt, for wherever his exact words were preserved, his synthetic and transcending thoughts are beautifully expressed. The principles of Gnosticism are well described in the following verbatim statement by him, supposed to have been preserved by Hippolytus. To you, therefore, I say what I say, and write what I write. And the writing is this: of the universal aeons, in brackets, that an explanation is periods, planes, or cycles of created and created life in substance and space, celestial creatures, close brackets. There are two shoots, without beginning or end, springing from one root, which is the power invisible, inapprehensible, silent, in brackets, pythos. Of these shoots, one is manifested from above, which is the great power, the universal mind ordering all things, male, and the other is manifested from below, the great thought, female, producing all things. Hence, pairing with each other, they unite and manifest the middle distance, incomprehensible air, without beginning or end. In this is the Father who sustains all things, and nourishes those things which have a beginning and end. And the reference is C. Simon Magus by G.R.S. Mead. By this, we are to understand that manifestation is the result of a positive and a negative principle, one acting upon the other, and it takes place in the middle plane, or point of equilibrium, called the pleroma, That's Pleroma. This pleroma is a peculiar substance produced out of the blending of the spiritual and material aeons. Out of the pleroma was individualized the demiurgus, the immortal mortal, to whom we are responsible for our physical existence and the suffering we must go through in connection with it. In the Gnostic system, 3 pairs of opposites, called syzygies, that's syzygies, syzygies, emanated from the Eternal One. These, with himself, make the total of 7. The 6, that's 3 pairs of aeons, the living divine principles, were described by Simon in the Philosophumena in the following manner. The first 2 were mind, in brackets nous, and thought, in brackets epinoi. Then came voice, phone, and its opposite, name, in brackets onoma. And lastly, reason, in brackets logismos, and reflection, in brackets emphymesis. From these primordial 6, united with the eternal flame, came forth the aeons, in brackets angels, who formed the lower worlds through the direction of the demiurgus. The reference is H.P. Blavatsky. How this first Gnosticism of Simon Magus and Menander, his disciple, was amplified and frequently distorted by later adherents to the cult must now be considered. The school of Gnosticism was divided into 2 major parts, commonly called the Syrian cult and the Alexandrian cult. These schools agreed in essentials, but the latter division was more inclined to be pantheistic, while the former was dualistic. While the Syrian cult was largely Simonian, the Alexandrian school was the outgrowth of the philosophical deductions of a clever Egyptian Christian, Basilides by name, who claimed to have received his instructions from the Apostle Matthew. Like Simon Magus, he was an emanationist with Neoplatonic inclinations. In fact, the entire Gnostic mystery is based upon the hypothesis of emanations as being the logical connection between the irreconcilable opposites, absolute spirit and absolute substance, which the Gnostics believed to have been coexistent in eternity. Some assert that Basilides was the true founder of Gnosticism, but there is much evidence to the effect that Simon Magus laid down its fundamental principles in the preceding century. The Alexandrian Basilides inculcated Egyptian Hermeticism, Oriental occultism, Chaldean astrology, and Persian philosophy in his followers, and in his doctrines sought to unite the schools of early Christianity with the ancient pagan mysteries. To him is attributed the formulation of that peculiar concept of the deity, which carries the name of Abraxas. In discussing the original meaning of this word, Godfrey Higgins, in his Celtic Druids, has demonstrated that the numerological powers of the letters forming the word Abraxas, when added together, result in the sum of 365. The same author also notes that the name Mithras, when treated in a similar manner, has the same numerical value. Basilides taught that the powers of the universe were divided into 365 aeons, or spiritual cycles, and that the sum of all these together was the Supreme Father. And to him he gave the Kabbalistical appellation Abraxas as being symbolical, numerologically, of his divine powers, attributes, and emanations. Abraxas is usually symbolized as a composite creature with the body of a human being and the head of a rooster, and with each of his legs ending in a serpent. C. W. King, in his Gnostics and Their Remains, gives the following concise description of the Gnostic philosophy of Basilides. quoting from the writings of the early Christian bishop and martyr, Saint Irenaeus. He asserted that God, the uncreated, eternal Father, had first brought forth nous, or mind. This, the logos, word. This again, phronesis, intelligence. From phronesis sprung Sophia, wisdom, and dynamis, strength. In describing Abraxas, C.W. King says, Velleman considers the composite image inscribed with the actual name Abraxas to be a Gnostic pantheos, representing the Supreme Being, with the 5 emanations marked out by appropriate symbols. From the human body, the usual form assigned to the deity, the 2 supporters, nous and logos, expressed in the serpents, symbols of the inner senses, and the quickening understanding, on which account the Greeks had made the serpent the attribute of Pallas. His head, that of a cock, represents phronesis, that bird being the emblem of foresight and of vigilance. His 2 arms hold the symbols of Sophia and Dynamis, the shield of wisdom and the whip of power. The Gnostics were divided in their opinions concerning the Demiurgus, or creator of the lower worlds. He established a terrestrial universe with the aid of 6 suns, or emanations, possibly the planetary angels, which he formed out of and yet within himself. As stated before, the Demiurgus was individualized as the lowest creation out of a substance called pleroma. One group of the Gnostics was of the opinion that the Demiurgus was the cause of all misery and was an evil creature, who by building his world had separated the souls of men from truth by encasing them in mortal vehicles. The other sect viewed the Demiurgus as being divinely inspired and merely fulfilling the dictates of the invisible Lord. Some Gnostics were of the opinion that the Jewish god, Jehovah, was the Demiurgus. This concept, under a slightly different name, apparently influenced medieval Rosicrucianism, which viewed Jehovah as the Lord of the material universe rather than as the supreme deity. Mythology abounds with the stories of gods who partook of both celestial and terrestrial natures. Odin of Scandinavia is a good example of a deity subject to mortality, bowing before the laws of nature and yet being, in certain senses at least, a supreme deity. The Gnostic viewpoint concerning the Christ is well worthy of consideration. This order claimed to be the only sect to have actual pictures of the divine Syrian. While these were, in all probability, idealistic conceptions of the Saviour based upon existing sculpturings and paintings of the pagan sun gods, they were all Christianity had. To the Gnostics, the Christ was the personification of nous, the divine mind, and emanated from the higher spiritual aeons. He descended into the body of Jesus at the baptism, and left it again before the crucifixion. The Gnostics declared that the Christ was not crucified, as this divine nous could not suffer death, but that Simon, the Cyrenian, offered his life instead, and that the nous, by means of its power, caused Simon to resemble Jesus. Irenaeus makes the following statement concerning the cosmic sacrifice of the Christ. When the uncreated, unnamed Father saw the corruption of mankind, he sent his firstborn, nous, into the world in the form of Christ, for the redemption of all who believe in him, out of the power of those that have fabricated the world, that is, in brackets, the Demiurgus and his 6 sons, the planetary genii. He appeared amongst men as the man Jesus, and wrought miracles. See King's Gnostics and their remains. The Gnostics divided humanity into 3 parts. Those who, as savages, worshipped only the visible nature, those who, like the Jews, worshipped the Demiurgus, and lastly, themselves or others of a similar cult, including certain sects of Christians who worshipped Nous, Christ, and the true spiritual light of the higher aeons. After the death of Basilides, Valentinus became the leading inspiration of the Gnostic movement. He still further complicated the system of Gnostic philosophy by adding infinitely to the details. He increased the number of emanations from the Great One, the Abyss, to 15 pairs, and also laid much emphasis on the Virgin Sophia, or wisdom. In the books of the Saviour, parts of which are commonly known as the Pistis Sophia, may be found much material concerning the strange doctrine of aeons and their strange inhabitants. James Freeman Clarke, in speaking of the doctrines of the Gnostics, says, "These doctrines, strange as they seem to us, had a wide influence in the Christian Church. Many other theories of the ancient Gnostics, especially those concerning scientific subjects, have been substantiated by modern research. Several sects branched off from the main stem of Gnosticism, such as the Valentinians, the Ophites, that's the serpent worshippers, and the Adamites. After the 3rd century, their power waned, and the Gnostics practically vanished from the philosophic world. An effort was made during the Middle Ages to resurrect the principles of Gnosticism, but owing to the destruction of their records, the material necessary was not available. Even today, there are evidences of Gnostic philosophy in the modern world, but they bear other names, and their true origin is not suspected. Many of the Gnostic concepts have actually been incorporated into the dogmas of the Christian Church, and our newer interpretations of Christianity are often along the lines of Gnostic emanationism." Okay, we're going on to our next chapter, so another good point to stop and discuss, if anyone wishes to. I'd like to say, for me at least, it's nice to have some understanding now of a lot of the terminology I hear around about, like the demiurgus and the logos.
Yes, I think that there's definitely a lot going on in the ethereal plane coming out of the Theosophic Society. And after you mentioned Helena Blavatsky, we started talking in the chat room about how the influences of the Theosophical Society, Alice Bailey, Manley Hall, and others really have been written out of the current time frame of history. We're presented with something where the material being presented to us now seems all new, but we can tell that it's very ancient text.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the next chapter is called, and I apologise to the listeners about my undoubted mispronunciation of a lot of these words, but this is called The Mysteries of Azar Hapi. That's ASAR-HAPI. The identity of the Greco-Egyptian Serapis, known to the Greeks as Serapis and the Egyptians as Azar Hapi, is shrouded by an impenetrable veil of mystery. While this deity was a familiar figure among the symbols of the secret Egyptian initiatory rites, his arcane nature was revealed only to those who had fulfilled the requirements of the Serapic cultus. Therefore, in all probability, excepting the initiated priest, the Egyptians themselves were ignorant of his true character. So far as known, there exists no authentic account of the rites of Serapis, but an analysis of the deity and his accompanying symbols reveals their salient points. In an oracle delivered to the king of Cyprus, Serapis described himself thus: "A god I am, such as I show to thee. The starry heavens are my head, my trunk the sea. Earth forms my feet, mine ears the air supplies. The sun's far darting, brilliant rays, mine eyes." Several unsatisfactory attempts have been made to etymologise the word Serapis. Godfrey Higgins notes that Soros was the name given by the Egyptians to a stone coffin, and Apis was Osiris incarnate in the sacred bull. These two words combined result in Soros Apis or Sor Apis, the tomb of the bull. But it is improbable that the Egyptians would worship a coffin in the form of a man. Several ancient authors, including Macrobius, have affirmed that Serapis was a name for the sun, because his image so often had a halo of light about its head. In his oration upon the sovereign sun, Julian speaks of the deity in these words: "One Jove, one Pluto, one sun is Serapis." In Hebrew, Serapis is seraph, meaning to blaze out or to blaze up. For this reason, the Jews designated one of their hierarchies of spiritual beings seraphim. The most common theory, however, regarding the origin of the name Serapis is that which traces its derivation from the compound Osiris Apis. At one time, the Egyptians believed that the dead were absorbed into the nature of Osiris, the god of the dead. While marked similarity exists between Osiris Apis and Serapis, by Egyptologists that Serapis is merely a name given to the dead Apis, or sacred bull of Egypt, is untenable in view of the transcendent wisdom possessed by the Egyptian priestcraft, who in all probability used the god to symbolize the soul of the world, the anima mundi. The material body of nature was called Apis. The soul, which escaped from the body at death, but was enmeshed with the form during physical life, was designated Serapis. C. W. King believes Serapis to be a deity of Brahmanic extraction, his name being the Grecianized form of Ser Ada or Sri Pa, two titles ascribed to Yama, the Hindu god of death. This appears reasonable, especially since there is a legend to the effect that Serapis, in the form of a bull, was driven by Bacchus from India to Egypt. The priority of the Hindu mysteries would further substantiate such a theory. Among other meanings suggested for the word Serapis are sacred bull, the sun in Taurus, the soul of Osiris, the sacred serpent, and the retiring of the bull. The last appellation has reference to the ceremony of drowning the sacred Apis in the waters of the Nile every 25 years. There is considerable evidence that the famous statue of Serapis in the Serapeum at Alexandria was originally worshipped under another name at Sinope, from which it was brought to Alexandria. There is also a legend which tells that Serapis was a very early king of the Egyptians, to whom they owed the foundation of their philosophical and scientific power. After his death, this king was elevated to the state of a god. Philarchus declared that the word Serapis means the power that disposed the universe into its present beautiful order. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch gives the following account of the origin of the magnificent statue of Serapis which stood in the Serapeum at Alexandria. While he was Pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy Soter had a strange dream in which he beheld a tremendous statue which came to life and ordered the Pharaoh to bring it to Alexandria with all possible speed. Ptolemy Soter, not knowing the whereabouts of the statue, was sorely perplexed as to how he could discover it. While the Pharaoh was relating his dream, a great traveller by the name of Sosibius, coming forward, declared that he had seen such an image at Sinope. The Pharaoh immediately dispatched Soteles and Dionysius to negotiate for the removal of the figure to Alexandria. 3 years elapsed before the image was finally obtained, the representatives of the Pharaoh finally stealing it and concealing the theft by spreading a story that the statue had come to life and, walking down the street leading from its temple, had boarded the ship, prepared for its transportation to Alexandria. Upon its arrival in Egypt, the figure was brought into the presence of 2 Egyptian initiates, the Eumolpid Timotheus and Manetho the Sebonite, who immediately pronounced it to be Serapis. The priest then declared that it was equivalent to Pluto. I'm assuming that word should have said equivalent to Pluto. This was a masterly stroke, for in Serapis the Greeks and Egyptians found a deity in common, and thus religious unity was consummated between the 2 nations. Several figures of Serapis that stood in his various temples in Egypt and Rome have been described by early authors. Nearly all these showed Grecian rather than Egyptian influence. In some, the body of the god, the coils of a great serpent. Others showed him as a composite of Osiris and Apis. A description of the god, that in all probability is reasonably accurate, is that which represents him as a tall, powerful figure, conveying the twofold impression of manly strength and womanly grace. His face portrayed a deeply pensive mood, the expression inclining towards sadness. His hair was long and arranged in a somewhat feminine manner, resting in curls upon his breast and shoulders. The face, save for his heavy beard, was also decidedly feminine. The figure of Serapis was usually robed from head to foot in heavy draperies, believed by initiates to conceal the fact that his body was androgynous. Various substances were used in making the statues of Serapis. Some undoubtedly were carved from stone or marble by skilled craftsmen. Others may have been cast from base or precious metals. One colossus of Serapis was composed of plates of various metals fitted together. In a labyrinth sacred to Serapis stood a 13-foot statue of him reputed to have been made from a single emerald. Modern writers, discussing this image, state that it was made of green glass poured into a mould. According to the Egyptians, however, it withstood all the tests of a natural emerald. Clement of Alexandria describes a figure of Serapis compounded from the following elements. First, findings of gold, silver, lead, and tin. Second, all manner of Egyptian stones, including sapphires, hematites, emeralds, and topazes. All these being ground down and mixed together with the colouring matter left over from the funeral of Osiris and Apis. The result was a rare and curious figure, indigo in colour. Some of the statues of Serapis must have been formed of extremely hard substances, for when a Christian soldier, carrying out the edict of Theodosius, struck the Alexandrian Serapis with this axe, that instrument was shattered into fragments and sparks flew from it. It is also quite probable that Serapis was worshipped in the form of a serpent, in common with many of the higher deities of the Egyptian and Greek pantheons. Serapis was called Theon Heptagrammaton, or the god with the name of 7 letters. The name Serapis, like Abraxas and Mithras, contains 7 letters. In their hymns to Serapis, the priests chanted the 7 vowels. Occasionally, Serapis is depicted with horns or a coronet of 7 rays. These evidently represented the 7 divine intelligences manifesting through the solar light. The Encyclopaedia Britannica notes that the earliest authentic mention of Serapis is in connection with the death of Alexander. Such was the prestige of Serapis that he alone of the gods was consulted in behalf of the dying king. The Egyptian secret school of philosophy was divided into the lesser and the greater mysteries, the former being sacred to Isis and the latter to Serapis and Osiris. Wilkinson is of the opinion that only the priests were permitted to enter the greater mysteries. Even the heir to the throne was not eligible until he had been crowned pharaoh. By virtue of his kingly office, he automatically became a priest and the temporal head of the state religion. See Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of the Egyptians. A limited number were admitted into the greater mysteries. These preserved their secrets inviolate. Much of the information concerning the rituals of the higher degrees of the Egyptian mysteries has been gleaned from an examination of the chambers and passageways in which the initiations were given. Under the temple of Serapis, destroyed by Theodosius, were found strange mechanical contrivances constructed by the priests in the subterranean crypts and caverns where the nocturnal initiatory rites were celebrated. These machines indicate the severe tests of moral and physical courage undergone by the candidates. After passing through these tortuous ways, the neophytes who survived the ordeals were ushered into the presence of Serapis, a noble and awe-inspiring figure illumined by unseen light. Labyrinths were also a striking feature in connection with the rite of Serapis. And E.A. Wallace Budge, in his Gods of the Egyptians, depicts Serapis, minotaur-like, with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Labyrinths were symbolic of the involvements and illusions of a lower world through which wanders the soul of man in its search for truth. In the labyrinth dwells the lower animal man with the head of a bull, who seeks to destroy the soul entangled in the maze of worldly ignorance. In this relation, Serapis becomes the trier or adversary who tests the souls of those seeking union with the immortals. The maze was also doubtless used to represent the solar system, the bull man representing the sun dwelling in the mystic maze of his planets, moons and asteroids. The Gnostic mysteries were acquainted with the arcane meaning of Serapis, and through the medium of Gnosticism, this god became inextricably associated with early Christianity. In fact, the Emperor Hadrian, while travelling in Egypt in AD 24, declared in a letter to Servianus that the worshippers of Serapis were Christians, and that the bishops of the church also worshipped at his shrine. He even declared that the patriarch himself, when in Egypt, was forced to adore Serapis as well as Christ. See Parsons' New Light on the Great Pyramid. The little suspected importance of Serapis as a prototype of Christ can be best appreciated after a consideration of the following extract from C.W. King's Gnostics and Their Remains. There can be no doubt that the head of Serapis, marked as the face is by a grave and pensive majesty, supplied the first idea for the conventional portraits of the Saviour. The Jewish prejudices of the first converts were so powerful that we may be sure no attempt was made to depict his countenance until some generations after all that had beheld it on earth had passed away.
Has Sparky had his SOFT?
Serapis
No, the only thing I gave him was a fish. I looked for SOFT, but I didn't see any, and I decided. Okay. Yeah, I was going to give him some heart also, and I didn't know where that was, so he got a fish, and he was okay, and then he got out.
That's why he came in to wake me up.
He wanted, okay. Yeah, he went out when I was out About 6:30.
Idolo Serapidis Diruendo.
Okay.
When the Christian soldiers, in obedience to this order, entered the Serapeum of Alexandria to destroy the image of Serapis, which had stood there for centuries, so great was their veneration for the god that they dared not touch the image, lest the ground should open at their feet and engulf them. At length, overcoming their fear, they demolished the statue, sacked the building, and finally, as a fitting climax to their offence, burned the magnificent library, which was housed within the lofty apartments of the Serapeum. Several writers have recorded the remarkable fact that Christian symbols were found in the ruined foundations of this pagan temple. Socrates, a church historian of the 5th century, declared that after the pious Christians had razed the Serapeum at Alexandria and scattered the demons who dwelt there under the guise of gods, beneath the foundations was found the monogram of Christ. To establish the relationship existing between the mysteries of Serapis and those of other ancient peoples. The first is from Richard Payne Knight's Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology, which states, hence Varro, in brackets, in De Lingua Latina, close brackets, says that Coelum and Terra, that is, universal mind and productive body, were the great gods of the Samothracian mysteries, and the same as the Serapis and Isis of the later Egyptians, the Tortos and Astarte of the Phoenicians, and the Saturn and Ops of the Latins. The second quotation is from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. 3, says Martianus Capella in his Hymn to the Sun, dwellers on the Nile adore as Serapis, and Memphis worships as Osiris. In the sacred rites of Persia, thou art Mithras. In Phrygia, Attis, and Libya bows down to thee as Ammon, and Phoenician Byblos as Adonis. Thus the whole world adores thee under different names. Okay, just starting a new chapter. I'm just going to get a drink. What do you think of what I've just read?
I've been off in the mythos of various different deities, and it all starts sounding the same as you start comparing the stories, so that it seems like every different religious group goes back to these same stories that we're having a presentation of in a almost like a base format. And in looking at it, I can almost see the formation of the Marvel universe that we're starting to get on video, because really that's what they're pushing on us, is that if everybody's familiar with this series of movies, it's another way of presenting the religion of the ages to us in a non-religious way.
Exactly. I mean, I hear a lot on videos on YouTube and from certain places online, the idea that there's so much evil worship around that people are not worshipping in the Christian, or at least the proponents of these ideas, their idea of the Christian faith, and that therefore they are worshipping the other side, as it were, of the spiritual battle. Whereas really the Christian faith is built upon these same ideas. They're all, as it states in Manley's work, they're all the same thing, just using different names. It's like school children saying, my father is better than your father. Or, I can't think of another analogy off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, it's like...
It seems ridiculous.
Yeah, the shroud is wrapped around each figure, but it's the same shroud.
Exactly. And they state things, I've heard it stated anyway by many in these groups, or this mindset that much of TV and film and music, again, they relegate to being devil worship, as it were, because they use a lot of this symbology of these ancient cults. But again, the symbology is of the same idea. It's all the same basic concepts. It makes me question a lot of what I've heard and a lot of what I've seen over the past 2 years.
I question a lot of everything anyway. I have to fit it out into my theory of chemistry. And so far, what you've read about from Manley Hall, there is nothing that is separate from any of the chemistry that I know that seems like he's giving something that flows in a different pattern than the chemistry would flow in. So my personal filter says this is good knowledge. I should listen to it and hear and take things from it. Now, I can also see where modern society, having no concept of any of this, is repeating the same tales in order to get different results, because Hollywood hasn't followed the storyline. It's sort of morphed out their new storyline, and maybe the battle of good and evil is just that Hollywood is sort of pushing everybody to think in terms of good and evil instead of just acting the way that people should act on human scale. And so we have all these big grand battles when in essence it's just a matter of coming to a ground state and accepting that other people can think differently. And if you reach the same conclusions from thinking differently, that should edify everybody involved, because you don't have to take the same path to get there. The path less chosen is often a lot more fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you hear it discussed about these secret societies and what some allege they get up to, or at least some of them, some members of them. And to be honest, if I was taught in private schools and I was raised learning this from a young age, as a child, when you learn about these different philosophical ideas and thoughts, these different ancient religions and what they believe, then eventually you're going to come to a set of beliefs, usually by the time you're adulthood. That may change later. But if those beliefs are bearing on the ideas, for example, that there is no afterlife, that what we do here doesn't matter, then you can understand why some people would grow up to and then act that out, or feel that there is no repercussion. Spirituality is really important, I think, for moral centre, but it's also quite dangerous, because it can lead you down the path of believing that it's anything is sanctioned, that you can give in to your base desires and whatever they may be, and that would be okay.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of allegory and a lot of stories, and the endings that we get from Hollywood have changed it so that the story has now become a hero's journey. Every hero is isolated. Everyone goes through the same setup where you establish yourself and then you have to deal with your existential crisis. And after you've created the journey of all the way down to the bottom and climbing back up again to make your hero's journey, you find that in the end, the only thing that has really changed is your own perspective of looking at things. And so there's a lot of stories that are told, but there's so many people who haven't read the novel who get the story second or third or fourth hand, and have to enact it to really learn the lesson of the story, because they didn't get it when they heard about it through these allegorative texts.
Well, it's the story of life, isn't it? It's the fool's journey, the story of the hero in the tarot. What you were describing,
Yes.
it's the story of humanity, of life, isn't it? It's the stages of life that we go through. Much of which seems to be ruled by the planetary bodies and their positions.
In a way, yes. And that the astrology that some people look down on morphed into astronomy, so there was a scientific basis for the same information, so that once discredited, it could be re-entered into the psyche in a way that no longer discredited it. They're pushing a lot of things. Yeah, they're pushing a lot of things on us that they give you A or they give you B, and A and B are not mutually inclusive, so you choose either one. But now we've expanded to a full Chinese menu of A, B, C, and D, and you're not allowed to pick 2 from column A and 1 from column B and 1 from column D. No, you have to take their package in the way it's force-fed. And right now the system's breaking down in some ways because we're not working on human scale. We're trying to advance ourselves beyond the fact that most humans have the same sort of life and the same sort of existential crises, and we each deal with it differently.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with dealing with it differently. There's no better or worse, just different.
But you need the different flavours, don't you?
Sure, life would...
In order to make a better dish.
Yes, life would be awful boring if all ice cream was vanilla.
Absolutely. Okay, should I read on?
Go for it, yes.
Okay. So the next chapter is entitled The Odinic Mysteries. Now, Odinic is spelled Odinic.
Odin, yes.
Odin, yeah. The date of the founding of the Odinic Mysteries is uncertain. Some writers declaring that they were established in the 1st century before Christ. Others, the 1st century after Christ. Robert McCoy, 33 degrees, which I'm assuming means 33-degree Mason, gives the following description of their origin. It appears from the Northern Chronicles that in the 1st century of the Christian era, Sigge, S-I-G-G-E, I only know to pronounce that like that because of the TV show Vikings, by the way, the chief of the Aser, A-S-E-R, an Asiatic tribe, emigrated from the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus into Northern Europe. He directed his course northwesterly from the Black Sea to Russia, over which, according to tradition, he placed one of his sons as a ruler, as he is said to have done over the Saxons and the Franks. He then advanced through Cimbria, Cimbria, to Denmark, which acknowledged his 5th son, Skjold, as its sovereign, and passed over to Sweden, where Gilf, who did homage to the wonderful stranger, was initiated into his mysteries, then ruled. He soon made himself master here, built Sigtuna as the capital of his empire, and promulgated a new code of laws, and established the sacred mysteries. He himself assumed the name of Odin, founded the priesthood of the 12 Drottars, in brackets, Druids, who conducted the secret worship and the administration of justice, and as prophets revealed the future. The secret rites of these mysteries celebrated the death of Balder, the beautiful and lovely, and represented the grief of gods and men at his death and his restoration to life. And the reference is General History of Freemasonry. After his death, the historical Odin was apophysized, his identity being merged into that of the mythological Odin, god of wisdom, whose cult he had promulgated. Odinism then supplanted the worship of Thor, the Thunderer, the supreme deity of the ancient Scandinavian pantheon. The mound where, according to legend, King Odin was buried is still to be seen near the site of his great temple at Uppsala. The 12 Drottars, who presided over the Odinic mysteries, evidently personified the 12 holy and ineffable names of Odin. The rituals of the Odinic mysteries were very similar to those of the Greeks, Persians, and Brahmins, after which they were patterned. The Drottars, who symbolized the signs of the zodiac, were the custodians of the arts and sciences, which they revealed to those who passed successfully the ordeals of initiation. Like many other pagan cults, the Odinic mysteries, as an institution, were destroyed by Christianity, but the underlying cause of their fall was the corruption of the priesthood. Mythology is nearly always the ritual and the symbolism of a mystery school. Briefly stated, the sacred drama which formed the basis of the Odinic mysteries was as follows. The supreme, invisible creator of all things was called All-Father. His regent in nature was Odin, the one-eyed god. Like Quetzalcoatl, Odin was elevated to the dignity of the supreme deity. According to the Drottars, the universe was fashioned from the body of Ymir, that's Y-M-I-R, the hoarfrost giant. Ymir was formed from the clouds of mist that rose from Ginnungagap, that's Ginnungagap, the great cleft in chaos into which the primordial frost giants and flame giants had hurled snow and fire. The three gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve, slew Ymir, and from him formed the world. From Ymir's various members, the different parts of nature were fashioned. After Odin had established order, he caused a wonderful palace, called Asgard, to be built on the top of a mountain, and here the 12 Aesir gods dwelt together, far above the limitations of mortal men. On this mountain also was Valhalla, the palace of the slain, where those who had heroically died fought and feasted day after day. Each night their wounds were healed, and the boar whose flesh they ate renewed itself as rapidly as it was consumed. Balder the Beautiful, the Scandinavian Christ, was the beloved son of Odin. Balder was not warlike. His kindly and beautiful spirit brought peace and joy to the hearts of the gods, and they all loved him save one. As Jesus had a Judas among his 12 disciples, so one of the 12 gods was false, Loki, the personification of evil. Loki caused Hother, that's H-O, with two little dots on top, T-H-R, the blind god of fate, to shoot Balder with a mistletoe arrow. With the death of Balder, light and joy vanished from the lives of the other deities. Heartbroken, the gods gathered to find a method whereby they could resurrect this spirit of eternal life and youth. The result was the establishment of the mysteries. The Odinic mysteries were given in underground crypts or caves. The chambers, 9 in number, representing the 9 worlds of the mysteries. The candidate seeking admission was assigned the task of raising Balder from the dead. Although he did not realise it, he himself played the part of Balder. He called himself a wanderer. The caverns through which he passed were symbolic of the worlds and spheres of nature. The priests who initiated him were emblematic of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The three supreme initiators, the sublime, the equal to the sublime, and the highest, were analogous to the worshipful master and the junior and senior wardens of a Masonic lodge. After wandering for hours through the intricate passageways, the candidate was ushered into the presence of a statue of Balder the Beautiful, the prototype of all initiates into the mysteries. This figure stood in the centre of a great apartment roofed with shields. In the midst of a chamber stood a plant with 7 blossoms, emblematic of the planers. In this room, which symbolised the house of the Aesir, or wisdom, the neophyte took his oath of secrecy and piety upon the blade of a sword. He drank the sanctified mead from a bowl made of a human skull, and, having passed successfully through all the tortures and trials designed to divert him from the course of wisdom, he was finally permitted to unveil the mystery of the personification of wisdom. He was presented in the name of Balder, the ring of the order. He was hailed as a man reborn, and it was said of him that he had died and had been raised again without passing through the gates of death. Richard Wagner's immortal composition, Der Ring des Nibelungen, is based upon the mystery rituals of the Odinic cult. While the great composer took many liberties with the original story, the Ring opera, declared to be the grandest tetralogy of music dramas the world possesses, has caught and preserved in a remarkable manner the majesty and power of the original sagas. Beginning with Das Rheingold, the action proceeds through the Walker and Siegfried to an awe-inspiring climax in Götterdämmerung, the Twilight of the Gods. Okay. Now going on to part 3. Does anybody want to comment before I speak on? Okay. The most famous of the ancient religious mysteries were the Eleusinian, whose rites were celebrated every 5 years in the city of Eleusis to honour Ceres, in brackets Demeter, Rhea or Isis, and her daughter Persephone. The initiates of the Eleusinian school were famous throughout Greece for the beauty of their philosophic concepts and the high standards of morality which they demonstrated in their daily lives. Because of their excellence, these mysteries spread to Rome and Britain, and later the initiations were given in both these countries. The Eleusinian mysteries, named for the community in Attica where the sacred dramas were first presented, are generally believed to have been founded by Eumolpos, about 1400 years before the birth of Christ. And through the Platonic system of philosophy, their principles have been preserved to modern times. The rites of Eleusis, with their mystic interpretations of nature's most precious secrets, overshadowed the civilizations of their time and gradually absorbed many smaller schools, incorporating into their own system whatever valuable information these lesser institutions possessed. Hecthorne sees in the mysteries of Ceres and Bacchus a metamorphosis of the rites of Isis and Osiris, and there is every reason to believe that all so-called secret schools of the ancient world were branches from one philosophic tree, which, with its roots in heaven and its branches on the earth, is, like the spirit of man, an invisible but ever-present cause of the objectified vehicles that give it expression. The mysteries were the channels through which this one philosophic light was disseminated, and their initiates, resplendent with intellectual and spiritual understanding, were the perfect fruitage of a divine tree, bearing witness before the material world of the recondite source of all light and truth. The rites of Eleusis were divided into what were called the lesser and the greater mysteries. According to James Gardner, the lesser mysteries were celebrated in the spring, probably at the time of the vernal equinox in the town of Agrae, and the greater in the fall, the time of the autumnal equinox at Eleusis or Athens. It is supposed that the former were given annually and the latter every 5 years. The rituals of the Eleusinians were highly involved, and to understand them required a deep study of Greek mythology, which they interpreted in its esoteric light with the aid of their secret keys. The lesser mysteries were dedicated to Persephone. In his Eleusinian and Bacchic mysteries, Thomas Taylor sums up their purpose as follows. The lesser mysteries were designed by the ancient theologists, their founders, to signify occultly the condition of the unpurified soul invested with an earthy body and enveloped in a material and physical nature. The legend used in the lesser rites is that of the abduction of the goddess Persephone, the daughter of Ceres, by Pluto, the lord of the underworld, or Hades. While Persephone is picking flowers in a beautiful meadow, the earth suddenly opens and the gloomy lord of death, riding in a magnificent chariot, emerges from its somber depths and, grasping her in his arms, carries the screaming and struggling goddess to his subterranean palace, where he forces her to become his queen. It is doubtful whether many of the initiates themselves understood the mystic meaning of this allegory, for most of them apparently believed that it referred solely to the succession of seasons. It is difficult to obtain satisfactory information concerning the mysteries, for the candidates were bound by inviolable oaths never to reveal their inner secrets to the profane. At the beginning of the ceremony of initiation, the candidates stood upon the skins of animals sacrificed for the purpose, and vowed that death should seal his lips before he would divulge the sacred truths which were about to be communicated to him. Through indirect channels, however, some of their secrets have been preserved. The teachings given to the neophytes were substantially as follows. The soul of man, often called a psyche, and in the Eleusinian mysteries symbolized by Persephone, is essentially a spiritual being. Its true home is in the higher worlds, where, free from the bondage of material form and material concepts, it is said to be truly alive and self-expressive. The human or physical nature of man, according to this doctrine, is a tomb, a quagmire, a false and impermanent thing, the source of all sorrow and suffering. Plato describes the body as the sepulchre of the soul, and by this he means not only the human form, but also the human nature. The gloom and depression of the lesser mysteries represented the agony of the spiritual soul unable to express itself because it has accepted the limitations and illusions of human environment. The crux of the Eleusinian argument was that man is neither better nor wiser after death and during life. If he does not rise above ignorance during his sojourn here, man goes at death into eternity to wander about forever, making the same mistakes which he made here. If he does not outgrow the desire for material possessions here, he will carry it with him into the invisible world, where, because he can never gratify the desire, he will continue in endless agony. Dante's Inferno is symbolically descriptive of the sufferings of those who never freed their spiritual natures from the cravings, habits, viewpoints, and limitations of their plutonic personalities. Those who made no endeavour to improve themselves, whose souls have slept during their physical lives, passed at death into Hades, where, lying in rows, They slept through all eternity as they had slept through life. To the Eleusinian philosophers, birth into the physical world was death in its fullest sense of the world. Oh, sorry, I think I should say birth into the physical world was death in the fullest sense of the word. And the only true birth was that of the spiritual soul of man rising out of the womb of his own fleshly nature. The soul is dead that slumbers, says Longfellow, and in this he strikes the keynote of the Eleusinian mysteries. Just as Narcissus, gazing at himself in the water, in brackets, the ancients used this mobile element to symbolize the transitory, illusionary, material universe, close brackets, lost his life trying to embrace a reflection. So man, gazing into the mirror of nature and accepting as his real self the senseless clay that he sees reflected, loses the opportunity afforded by physical life to unfold his immortal, invisible self. An ancient initiate once said that the living are ruled by the dead. Only those conversant with the Eleusinian concept of life could understand that statement. It means that the majority of people are not ruled by their living spirits, but by their senseless, hence dead, animal personalities. And reincarnation were taught in these mysteries, but in a somewhat unusual manner. It was believed that at midnight the invisible worlds were closest to the terrestrial sphere, and that souls coming into material existence slipped in during the midnight hour. For this reason, many of the Eleusinian ceremonies were performed at midnight. Some of those sleeping spirits who had failed to awaken their higher natures during the earth life and who now floated around in the invisible worlds, surrounded by a darkness of their own making, occasionally slipped through at this hour and assumed the forms of various creatures. The mystics of Eleusis also laid stress upon the evil of suicide, explaining that there was a profound mystery concerning this crime of which they could not speak, but warning their disciples that a great sorrow comes to all who take their own lives. This, in substance, constitutes the esoteric doctrine given to the initiates of the lesser mysteries. As the degree dealt largely with the miseries of those who failed to make the best use of their philosophic opportunities, the chambers of initiation were subterranean, and the horrors of Hades were vividly depicted in a complicated ritualistic drama. After passing successfully through the tortuous passageways with their trials and dangers, the candidate received the honorary title of Mistes. This meant one who saw through a veil or had a clouded vision. It also signified that the candidate had been brought up to the veil, which would be torn away in the higher degree. The modern word mystic, as referring to a seeker after truth according to the dictates of the heart along the path of faith, is probably derived from this ancient word, for faith is belief in the reality of things unseen or veiled. The greater mysteries, into which the candidate was admitted only after he had successfully passed through the ordeals of the lesser, and not always then, were sacred to Ceres, the mother of Persephone, and represent her as wandering through the world in quest of her abducted daughter. Ceres carries two torches, intuition and reason, to aid her in the search for a lost child, in brackets the soul. At last she found Persephone, not far from Eleusis, and out of gratitude taught the people there to cultivate corn, which is sacred to her. She also founded the mysteries. Ceres appeared before Pluto, god of the souls of the dead, and pleaded with him to allow Persephone to return to her home. This the god at first refused to do, because Persephone had eaten of the pomegranate, the fruit of mortality. At last, however, he compromised, and agreed to permit Persephone to live in the upper world half of the year if she would stay with him in the darkness of Hades for the remaining half. The Greeks believed that Persephone was a manifestation of solar energy, which in the winter months lived under the earth of Pluto, but in the summer returned again with the goddess of productiveness. There is a legend that the flowers loved Persephone, and that every year when she left for the dark realms of Pluto, the plants and shrubs would die of grief. While the profane and uninitiated had their own opinions on these subjects, the truths of the Greek allegories remain safely concealed by the priests, who alone recognize the sublimity of these great philosophic and religious parables. Thomas Taylor epitomizes the doctrines of the greater mysteries in the following statement. The greater mysteries, obscurely intimated by mystic and splendid visions, the felicity of the soul, both here and hereafter, when purified from the defilement of a material nature, and constantly elevated to the realities of intellectual or spiritual vision. Just as the lesser mysteries discuss the prenatal epoch of man, when the consciousness in its 9 days, embryologically months, was descending into the realm of illusion and assuming the veil of unreality, so the greater mysteries discuss the principles of spiritual regeneration and reveal to initiates not only the simplest, but also the most direct and complete method of liberating their higher natures from the bondage of material ignorance. Like Prometheus, chained to the top of Mount Caucasus, man's higher nature is chained to his inadequate personality. The 9 days of initiation were also symbolic of the 9 spheres through which the human soul descends during the process of assuming a terrestrial form. The secret exercises for spiritual unfoldment given to disciples of the higher degrees are unknown, but there is every reason to believe that they were similar to the Brahmanic mysteries, since it is known that the Eleusinian ceremonies were closed with the Sanskrit words konks om pat. That part of the allegory, referring to the 2 6-month periods, during one of which Persephone must remain with Pluto, while during the other she may revisit the upper world, offers material for deep consideration. It is probable that the Eleusinians realized that the soul left the body during sleep, or at least was made capable of leaving by the special training which undoubtedly they were in a position to give. Thus, Persephone would remain as the queen of Pluto's realm during the waking hours, but would ascend to the spiritual worlds during the periods of sleep. The initiate was taught how to intercede with Pluto to permit Persephone, the initiate's soul, to ascend from the darkness of his material nature into the light of understanding. When thus freed from the shackles of clay and crystallized concepts, the initiate was liberated, not only for the period of his life, but for all eternity, for never thereafter was he divested of those soul qualities which after death were his vehicles for manifestation and expression in the so-called heaven world. In contrast to the idea of Hades as a state of darkness below, the gods were said to inhabit the tops of mountains, a well-known example being Mount Olympus, where the 12 deities of the Greek pantheon were said to dwell together. In his initiatory wanderings, the neophyte therefore entered chambers of ever-increasing brilliancy to portray the ascent of the spirit from the lower worlds into the realms of bliss. As the climax to such wanderings, he entered a great vaulted room, in the centre of which stood a brilliantly illumined statue of the goddess Ceres. Here, in the presence of a hierophant, and surrounded by priests in magnificent robes, he was instructed in the highest of the secret mysteries of the Eleusis. At the conclusion of this ceremony, he was hailed as an epoptes, which means one who has beheld or seen directly. For this reason also, initiation was termed autopsy. The epoptes was then given certain sacred books, probably written in cipher, together with tablets of stone on which secret instructions were engraved. In the obelisk in Freemasonry, John A. Weiss or Weiss, that's W-E-I-S-S-E, describes the officiating personages of the Eleusinian mysteries as consisting of a male and a female hierophant who directed the initiations, a male and a female torchbearer, a male herald, and a male and a female altar attendant. There were also numerous minor officials. He states that, according to Porphyry, the hierophant represents Plato's demiurgus, or a creator of the world, the torchbearer, the sun, the altarman, the moon, the herald, Hermes, or Mercury, and the other officials, minor stars. From the records available, a number of strange and apparently supernatural phenomena accompanied the rituals. Many initiates claim to have actually seen the living gods themselves. Whether this was the result of religious ecstasy or the actual cooperation of invisible powers with the visible priests must remain a mystery. In the Metamorphosis, or Golden Ass, Apuleius, that's Apuleius, thus describes what in all probability is his initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries. I approached to the confines of death, and having trod on the threshold of Proserpine, I returned from it, being carried through all the elements. At midnight I saw the sun shining with a splendid light, and I manifestly drew near to the gods beneath and the gods above, and proximately adored them. Women and children were admitted to the Eleusinian mysteries, and at one time there were literally thousands of initiates. Because this vast host was not prepared for the highest spiritual and mystical doctrines, a division necessarily took place within the society itself. The higher teachings were given to only a limited number of initiates who, because of superior mentality, showed a comprehensive grasp of their underlying philosophical concepts. Socrates refused to be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, for knowing its principles without being a member of the order, he realized that membership would steal his tongue. That the mysteries of Eleusis were based upon great and eternal truths is attested by the veneration in which they were held by the great minds of the ancient world. N. Uvarov asked, would Pindar, Plato, Cicero, Epictetus have spoken of them with such admiration if a hierophant had satisfied himself with loudly proclaiming his own opinions or those of his order? The garments in which candidates were initiated were preserved for many years and were believed to possess almost sacred properties. Just as the soul can have no covering save wisdom and virtue, so the candidates, being as yet without true knowledge, were presented to the mysteries unclothed, being first given the skin of an animal and later a consecrated robe to symbolize the philosophical teachings received by the initiate. During the course of initiation, the candidates pass through two gates. The first led downward into the lower worlds and symbolized his birth into ignorance. The second led upward into a room brilliantly lighted by unseen lamps, in which was the statue of Ceres, and which symbolized the upper world, or the abode of light and truth. Strabel states that the great temple of Eleusis would hold between 20 and 30,000 people. The caves dedicated by Zarathustra also had these two doors, symbolizing the avenues of birth and death. The following paragraph from Porphyry gives a fairly adequate conception of Eleusinian symbolism. God, being a luminous principle, residing in the midst of the most subtle fire, he remains forever invisible to the eyes of those who do not elevate themselves above material life. On this account, the sight of transparent bodies such as crystal, Parian marble, and even ivory recalls the idea of divine light. As the sight of gold excites an idea of its purity, for gold cannot be sullied. Some have thought why a black stone would signify the invisibility of the divine essence. To express supreme reason, the divinity was represented under the human form, and beautiful, for God is the source of beauty, of different ages, and in various attitudes, sitting or upright, of one or the other sex, as a virgin or a young man, a husband or a bride, that all the shades and gradations might be marked. Everything luminous was subsequently attributed to the gods, the sphere, and all that is spherical, to the universe, to the sun and the moon, sometimes to fortune and to hope, the circle and all circular figures to eternity, to the celestial movements, to the circles and zones of the heavens, the section of circles, to the phases of the moon, and pyramids and obelisks to the igneous principle, and with that to the gods of heaven. A cone expresses the sun, a cylinder the earth, the phallus and triangle, a symbol of the matrix, designate generation. And the reference for this is from Essay on the Mysteries of Eleusis by N. Uvarov. The Eleusinian mysteries, according to Heckthorne, survived all others and did not cease to exist as an institution until nearly 400 years after Christ, when they were finally suppressed by Theodosius the Great, who cruelly destroyed all who did not accept the Christian faith. Of this greatest of all philosophical institutions, Carroll said that it taught men not only how to live, but also how to die. And I'm going to stop there because we're about to go on to the Orphic mysteries. And the show will soon be over.
Yes, I don't think that with 10 minutes left in the show, we should be starting another chapter. It's very interesting. A lot of what you have read just now is stuff I know from various rituals of different organizations that I've been a member of. And it seems a lot of these organizations, like the Grange here in the United States, which is a farm organization, is built in this mythology that people here have never heard until they joined the organization. So, very, very interesting. I wonder what...
So I was thinking a lot about Freemasonry and also the Giza pyramids. I know the Great Giza Pyramid has a lower chamber and an upper chamber, does it not?
It does.
And you descend down, and then you can go further down to the lower chamber or upper to the more grandiose and blocked off. Was that upper chamber not blocked off for a long time? The upper chamber, which is the spiritual chamber.
Yeah, they're called the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber, but I'm not up on my pyramidology lately. But the pyramid also seems to be a large calendar in the way it's laid out. And there's a lot more to the sacred geometry of what's going on than meets the eye. You know, the whole reading today makes me wonder what it is that Manley Hall is trying to convey to the readers and who his expected readers are. Because this, as it says in the title, is the secret teachings of the ages, so it's not known to very many people, the historic content of what's there. But from 1920s, when he wrote this book, to now in the 2020s, 100 years, population of the world has grown from what, 2 billion to 7.5 billion? So there's a lot more people who are not spiritually grounded on the earth right now. Was he trying to develop a cult of priests who understood some of the history and could preserve it? I mean, why was he writing this book?
Perhaps to free people from religious dogma, to realize that religious dogma is basically allegories of philosophic thought, and to free themselves from the matrix.
Yeah, it's interesting how he mentioned the Matrix in 1920 and the movie didn't come out for another 80 years, isn't it?
Exactly. And what is that if not a tale of the real people being housed in false bodies, if you like, and not realizing that they're in these false bodies?
There's a lot of comparative thought that is here, and the body that the individual consciousness finds itself in is unique to that consciousness in the way we've been taught, but I'm not sure at all that consciousness is unique to us as individuals. And in fact, I'm sure it's not, because we have our higher selves and we have other forms that we know are us. It's just we don't have another tangible place to place it. It's like, where do we go when we're sleeping? Because I know that you're not really there when you're not there, but you got to be somewhere, don't you?
Exactly. I mean, I've left my body a couple of times in my life. No, like when I've been awake. And the first time I was a child. I can't remember, but I think I was about 13-ish when I did it. And I did it deliberately because I was interested in the occult at the time, and I'd read something or seen something about it. And being a child thinking this will be so cool, I can leave my body and go and spy upon my friends, and then tomorrow I'll freak them out at school by telling them I know what they were up to. So that was my motivation. I was sorry for leaving my body. I didn't really expect it to work. But to my shock, it did. And I just remember vividly hovering above my body, lying in my bed. My vision was as clear as day. It was exactly the same, but I had no physical body with me. And it only lasted for a few seconds, because first came the absolute shock of where I was, and then the fear, and then instantly I was back in my body again. And it's happened another time when I was in a car accident since, but when I was an adult. But for me, that changed my life, because it was, for me, confirmation, as much I think anybody living can have, that we do have a soul, and it is separate from our physical form, and therefore will continue after the physical form dies. It changed my entire perception of what I am in life.
Yeah, I think that gets back to where David Icke talks about how we are consciousness in the form of human, as opposed to human in the form of consciousness. And it is a tough little finite line to think about, because sometimes what human is and what human is not very clear. Consciousness, I'm not sure, is a human trait unique from other forms of consciousness. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about thinking lately, and the more thinking I do about thinking, the less probable I think that thinking is. But I think that everything thinks. This is...
I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, that's René Descartes, who was Descartes in the first episode of the reading. But
right.
French is interesting because they don't pronounce all their letters. This is The New Way on Steempunk Radio on the TuneIn app. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. With me is Mel from Amber's Place. And you can find Mel. Mel, why don't you tell them where they can find you?
You can find me on Amber's Place YouTube channel. At some point, I will get the recordings of these shows on there. So you can message me or comment on there. You can also email me, Amber's 4place, the 4 being the number, at gmail.com. And those, I think, are the best ways to contact me.
If you were to project how long it will take us in terms of shows to get through the book, how many more shows do you think we'll have? And we can answer that sometime. We don't have to answer it now. But I'm more than happy. I'm more than happy to keep moving along at this pace. My question is, if we're looking at doing this for 3 or 4 years to get through the book, we might want to choose segments of the book based on certain perspectives of philosophy that we can then apply to the reality of now. But this is all great background history, and so I'm very much interested in keeping it going for the time being.
Excellent. I'm happy to do it. Carry on doing it as long as you are.
Good. And on occasion, we're rebroadcasting this show on YouTube on Disintegral's channel, and he does cloud therapy, so you can watch the clouds as you're listening. And that makes things pretty unique because there's a lot more behind the clouds than most people can see with the naked eye. Wow, it has been quite the adventure. I think that what we're reading is the basis for the whole Marvel comic book overlay on the current Hollyweird scene. So where we're getting characters like Thor, they're talking about, Manley Hall was talking about Odin, which is just another name for Thor. And so there's a lot going on here that proves to me that the more things change, the more they really stay the same. Well, this has been the New Way radio show on Steempunk Radio. And if you're listening today, please do tune in tomorrow because we've got a lot more good conversation to do. And tomorrow I might be looking into the phenomena of social media. I have a prospective guest to talk about the Quite Frankly phenomenon, which has taken the globe all of a sudden because it's fun to listen to somebody who can entertain you as they're talking just by being the source of entertainment. So tune in tomorrow, same bat time, same bat place, same bat adventure.